Hello everyone, Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Louie Lujan, Director, Government Relations, and Senior Lobbyist at CIMA Law Group. Louie Lujan, welcome back, man.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kevin. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes, and first and foremost, congratulations to you and the CIMA Law Group and the people of Arizona for passing Proposition 207, the Smart and Safe Arizona Act, man. Adult use. It's here.
Yeah, thank you. It's here. It's here to stay. It's going to change the future of the state. And I think there are a lot of people. Well, thank you, first of all. We really do appreciate that. We really did work hard. Everybody here at the firm and all the people that were involved in the campaign behind the effort. But, you know, beyond the congratulations and the thank yous, I think that it's really going to change the future of the state and help people view it, because there were people all across the country that were wondering, what's Arizona going to do? What's Arizona going to do? Are they going to pass it? Are they not? And it worked out, and here we are.
Yeah, and I mean, it was overwhelming, right? I think from what I read, the margin was like 60-40.
Yeah, the margin was overwhelming. And, you know, there's a guy, a good friend of ours. I've known him for years, even when I was elected. His name is Chad Campbell, and Chad was the effort behind it. He's the one that actually ran the campaign, former legislator. And he deserves a lot of credit because of his efforts to get the signatures, to get the campaign up and running. It passed with overwhelming margins. So we're really happy to see that.
And when you talk about the signatures that were needed to be collected, from my understanding, there was even an action by the Arizona court to not allow online signatures, right? So all signatures had to be in person. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a bizarre, detailed story, but essentially you're right. What happened was, there was an effort, an unsuccessful effort to invalidate some of the signatures or to change the rules, if you will, of what a signature is. And that didn't work out, but you're right. And, look, when you have, it's not just this particular initiative, but when you have initiatives out there that have enough opposition, they're going to try everything to stop it or to halt it or slow it down. And that's what that was.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's politics, right? I mean, that's.
I was just going to say that, look, it's politics. And, I recall being elected myself, you're always going to have someone out there that wants your job and or trying to stop an effort you're involved in. And that's just par for the course. That's just part of the game. It is what it is.
It is what it is. Exactly. Yeah. So, hey, I wanted to kind of talk about this because I know that there's a lot of people out there, including our listeners, that are very anxious to see what transpires out of the 5 states that 4 of which went adult use, but 5 total that passed for also medical. So let's kind of break this down into, like, this isn't going to happen overnight, right? I mean, it's not like we can go and pick up a pre-rolled joint, at a dispensary in Arizona. So let's talk about, okay, now that the legislation has been pushed through, the people have spoken, what's next? And then we'll get into the future of the state of Arizona and the benefits and other things that will transpire out of it.
Yeah, it's an excellent point to make, right? You can't go out tomorrow and, purchase products, so to speak. There's a process that has to happen. But let me preface what I'm going to say by this. Even right now, in the most liberal of states, when it comes to cannabis, you can't do that. I mean, even in California, for example, there are rules in place. Legalized cannabis does not mean you can just go out and do what you want. There's certain prohibitions, use in public spaces, this and that, local control. So prefaced with that, my comment is you're right, there's a process that has to take place. So without overcomplicating it, here's essentially the process. First, you have the actual act itself, which I have a copy of here, that consists of many pages with a lot of text, and that has to get certified with signatures. Then it goes on the ballot. Well, once it's on the ballot, it gets voted on. And as you know, it got voted on and passed. Well, when it gets passed, there are certain administrative and legislative processes that must take place in order for it to actually become official law. And that process can take anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending on the state and depending on the issue. And it falls into essentially two categories. You have the legislature, that the governor's office and so forth, that has to actually certify it and make the law official, bless it, so to speak. Then you have the administration, the Department of Agriculture, for example, that has to go out there and set up the rules. They have to write everything down on paper, really is what they do, and outline guidelines, and they got to give it to the cities. And then the way the law is written, the cities have a lot of leeway in how they implement it as well. Now, I'll kind of leave it at that, but there's a lot more detail to it, but that's essentially what has to happen.
Well, and I want to dive into that a bit more if there's any legs there, but I do want to ask a follow-up question. So when you talk about, like, say, who was it that you said that was going to be writing the rules? The Department of Agriculture.
So that's one of the agencies involved. Yes.
One of the agencies. So as they're drafting those guidelines, I mean, have those already kind of been a work in progress, or is this totally new from scratch that they're starting and everybody's going to have to wait on?
Okay. So it's an excellent question. It's a little bit of both. Now, let me contrast it with the different state. Now, in California, for example, the answer would be, yeah, they had already in place some rules, some regs that were just sitting in someone's hard drive, in a folder, waiting to get dusted off and implemented. In Arizona, it was a bit different from what I hear, because there was always this thing in the back of people's minds that it wouldn't pass. So there's a little bit more of a, well, we'll figure it out when it happens, if it happens attitude. And that's where we're at. And I anticipate not necessarily, look, at the Department of Agriculture is good. They've been really good with hemp, for example, and their licensing rollout and setting up the rules. But essentially, it's almost like a one-man shop down there. And when you have this new law come into effect for the whole state, and you need resources to get it implemented, it's going to be a bumpy rollout, I think. So, we'll see. But hey, that's, why law firms like us are here, is to help people with the process.
Absolutely. And I would imagine, like, the Arizona Department of Health and Human Services would also be responsible for drafting guidelines as well, in addition to, like, the Department of Ag, right?
Correct. So that's the other department that's involved. Exactly. And then there's other departments, there's law enforcement that has to come up with their own rules and regs. How are they going to enforce this and that? And then there's different city departments that are involved. How are they going to, with local control, figure out their rules? But you're right. Statewide, those are the two main ones that will be involved in rolling out, so to speak, the new law and rules.
And it seems like it's a top-down approach, obviously, right? Because
Yes.
those larger state interdepartmental organizations, and then from there, the local municipalities need to basically adopt what they've kind of laid out for them and work around those parameters, right?
Yeah, so a little bit of detail on that. We were actually very involved in the California rollout. There's a lot in Arizona to hash out still, so to speak. And I'll try to use all the puns I can,
Keep them coming.
Yeah, right, keep them coming, right. So in California, for example, we were involved in interpreting a lot of the laws on behalf of our clients. And when the analogy or the parallel is this, is in Arizona, just like in California, the cities are given a lot of leeway in how to implement the laws in their own city. So just because the state of Arizona, the state of California, the state of Colorado, whatever, legalize cannabis, does not mean that the cities just have to follow suit and just allow it in a free-flowing type of way in their city. There's a lot of zoning issues that are left up to the cities. There's a lot of other regulations that are left up to the cities to figure out how best in their city to implement the rules. So it's a statewide law. It's here to stay, but it's almost like saying, look, the state is establishing the fence posts, the parameters, and the cities are then allowed to set up their own rules within those parameters. And that's where the tricky part comes in, because there's examples. I'll give you just one example. In California, you have cities where it's legal to sell. I'm oversimplifying this, but the example is this. It's legal to sell, but you can't transport. So how are you then going to get product into your store? So there's issues like that that have to be worked out. And it's, it's a very, very interesting day for cannabis consultants for that reason, because you're dealing with a set of different rules and regs and different city councils and managers and so forth and so on. So it gets sticky.
Yeah, I can imagine the variables that you're talking about, right? So
Yeah,
I'm glad that you bring up the comparison with California, because I don't know if it was you who said this the last time you were on, or someone from California, but they were talking about how when you talk about zoning laws, right? Even though California is a big state, and yes, like you said, at the state level, they've Prop 67 adult use is great, but
yeah,
there's different municipalities and towns that don't allow for it. So I think that they say
right.
60% of the municipalities within the state of California are saying no. So
Yeah.
although you still have that, that legalization at the state level, like you said, there are pockets where they can do their own thing. And do you think that will be the case in Arizona? Like, will there be over 50 to 60% of municipalities not being okay with this, or is that we got to wait till that shakes out?
Well, partially we have to wait for it to shake out. But I will say this, there will be, just like California, a high percentage of cities, for whatever their reasons, that do not necessarily either A, agree with the vote that happened and the passage of it, or they feel that in their city there's a need to preserve the character of the community, whatever that may be. And look, I'll be frank, I was a mayor before. I get it. When you're a mayor and you're a city council member or you're a city staffer, you have, with valid reason, every right to say, I don't agree with what just passed. Our city isn't ready for it, doesn't want it, whatever. You know your city best. However, part of the art of being a mayor and a council member is to realize that there are certain initiatives that get passed that you may not completely agree with, and that are state law, and that you do have to find a way to make it work. You're not, you're not a monarchy in a sense, right? If the people vote something in, you may not agree with it, but you have to figure out a way to get it done. And to your question, that's the next struggle, I think, for Arizona is, yes, we passed it, and yes, we passed a major hurdle in getting this legalized, but we're just beginning to see the legal battles that are going to unfold, the controversies, the public hearings, the crises with licensing and zoning. And zoning, that's what we specialize in. And I tell you, zoning is going to be a huge, huge issue when it comes to, getting this new law implemented. So,
Well, I want to get to just to add what you were saying. I like the way you put that. That was well put, where you say, look, you may not agree with it. You may not, for whatever reason, right? But the fact that it's a state legislation that's been passed, you got to work with it, right? And try to
right,
not be a hurdle or a barrier, right? I mean, you made the example of California and how in some municipalities it's illegal to transport, right? Like that right there is being a hindrance on something that could be beneficial from an economic perspective for the state, right? So
correct.
at that point, we're just hoping that and it just goes back to what we said at a basic level of understanding of the plan. It's that if you don't want to use it, if you don't want to have it around you, at least be aware of the benefits of what it can do, right? From a medicinal standpoint, from an industrial hemp standpoint, economics,
Right.
environmental standpoint. That knowledge is very important. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was going to add something in there. I was going to say, I think I gave you the analogy, or not even, it's an example of last time we were working with this client in a city in California. And what happens in this case, and I see it happening here too, when in two cities next to each other, city A has a set of zoning rules for cannabis. City B has a similar setup for zoning rules and regs for cannabis, but they're different. They're just offset a little bit. And in one of them, you have a cannabis shop that wants to open up on the border of the other. And in this one, they don't allow cannabis shops within 300 feet of a residential zone, but they're on the border and there's nothing within 300 feet, but here there is. So what do you do, right? Those are real dilemmas. because these two cities have to work something out, because the cannabis shop may be okay with its rules and regs in this city, but not in this one. And they're completely split. You got residents here and a cannabis shop here completely following the rules, but not according to this city. Those are regional issues that are going to have to be worked out. So it's kind of like saying, look, it's clear in my mind, and it should be in everybody's mind, that people want to see the cities enact rules and regs that allow for the legalization of cannabis. It was passed overwhelmingly in ERA. I mean, what can be clearer than that, right? So I think that it's up to government to do the responsible thing, to figure out the right way to implement this without being a hindrance. And that's going to be a challenge in cities, because frankly, not everybody agrees with it.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. That is going to be the next hurdle, it sounds like. And one more thing on zoning, have y'all encountered the challenge yet of, I mean, I know you mentioned earlier that the Department of Agriculture in Arizona has done a great job when it came to their hemp program and implementing their hemp plan and guidelines, right? And that was in 2018. So are y'all starting to see the challenge of outdoor grows in Arizona that are THC focused, as opposed to hemp farms that are, below that 0.3 THC? And the reason I ask is due to cross-pollination concerns, right? So have you experienced any of that challenge yet?
We have, and I'll tell you, that's a whole podcast in and of itself. That right there presents some significant challenges that people can't even imagine right now, because a lot of it is it gets into the very nuances of the law, the legal ramifications of it. So it's a topic in and of itself. But to your question, yes, we're beginning to see that. Now, it's different in Arizona than, say, I keep using California because we do work out there. It's different in the sense that there's a lot more open land in the middle of nowhere in Arizona. Now, there is in California as well, but it's a more populated state. So you're running into more complex, different type of zoning issues. Whereas in Arizona, you have, a grow that could be, hundreds of miles away from anything. Mm-hmm. So it presents different types of challenges is what I'm saying. But when you get into the whole THC issue and percentages, and it gets very, very complex.
Next time, as you start to work with more of your clients in that area, we should definitely dedicate a podcast to that.
Oh, that'd be great.
As you're learning more about that, because that was something that I didn't even think of. And I had, I think it was Libby Cooper on.
Oh yeah.
Who mentioned that this challenge for her farm in California. And I was thinking to myself, we all should be celebrating that hemp is passed, and while everybody's excited about it from an industry standpoint, there are concerns of that cross-pollination and all that.
The cross-pollination issue, like I said, that's a whole topic in and of itself, but that's an issue that's going to be becoming more, at least publicly known, as we start to have these grows expand. You start to have government more involved because of the legalization. It's going to become one of those issues that, one, you're definitely going to want to have a podcast on it. But two, you're going to start seeing a lot more info on it online even. So, yeah. And another topic, by the way, that people aren't even really touching on as much, and we just know about it because we do criminal law here as well, is the whole, the expungement of records, how it affects people's criminal past, finding jobs, all immigration, for example, consequences. It's just the whole legalization of cannabis it opens up so many other issues that people are just kind of not even foreseeing right now. And we just know because we get calls every day on things like that. So
yeah, well, let's dive into that, because that's a perfect segue, and that's what I wanted to talk about next. So I recently had on Dante West. He just was released from prison in Kansas 2 weeks ago.
Really?
For over 3.5 years, he was in prison for a pound of marijuana that wasn't even his. The guy that was in the car in front of them on their road trip basically blamed him when they were caught with it and said that he was going to buy it, and went to testify. And that particular testimonial was what put him in jail. And so he reached out to different governors and whatnot, and policymakers in Kansas to get clemency, and they ended up going to bat for him, and he won in court. So my point of this all is that decriminalization is a huge topic right now, especially because we're seeing so much public support for the plant, more than ever, right?
Yep.
it's important that these wrongs are undone. So let's talk about the decriminalization aspects of the bill, that was just passed in Arizona.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack here in my answer, but let me preface it again by saying one thing, that I think it's great, that we legalized cannabis in Arizona, and there's an obvious effort across the country to do that. But what I think what sometimes gets um, overshadowed and swept under the rug is the dramatic positive effects that decriminalization has. And the reason why I say that is because I've heard stories like that, and I know all of us have, where you have people that are spending more time in prison for possession of marijuana than people that commit way more serious and even sometimes violent crimes. And personally, I think that's a dramatic failure of the justice system.
Yeah, just to that, he mentioned that he would talk to people in prison that were pedophiles, sex
Yeah,
offenders, and murderers, and they had less time than him.
yeah. And look, we all hear, the jokes, and it's funny, but when you hear things, someone's spending more time for weed. But look, at the seriousness of the topic is real, because how many other Dantes are there out there that are in there now that don't get a chance to share their story on a podcast? Or how many people are out there that have had family members arrested or searched their homes or hassled by law enforcement for marijuana? Now, there's a difference between possession and trafficking, right? Now, that's a distinction I want to make, because if you're asking, what I'm not saying is that, hey, for people that are trafficking or pushing drugs across the border or involved in the movement of it, that's different. But when you have somebody that is arrested for possessing a relatively small amount, and in Arizona's case, up until this law was passed, it was treated as a felony, that to me is just wrong. I absolutely disagree with the way that was treated. And it's one of the last remaining roots, if you will, of the treatment of marijuana as it was back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s as a gateway drug. It's absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, it's a little bit of a well, it's a little bit of a shame, I would say, for people to even, some states like Arizona, to have treated it like felonies. I'm glad that's overturned. But also, I do think on the positive note, we're going to see there's a lot of room for a positive outcome when the criminal justice reform starts with the decriminalization of possession of marijuana. So that's my whole preface to it. But in Arizona's case, let me tell you this, what's going to happen. So we do criminal law here, as you know. We also, the other part of the firm also does immigration law. And you have a lot of people, unfortunately, that for whatever the reason have been arrested for possession of marijuana. And because it was treated as a felony, they have some serious immigration consequences. And these are people that have spent the last 20 plus years, 30 years in the country, not getting into any serious trouble other than possessing marijuana. And now, because of that felony, they're facing some serious issues, deportation, whatever it may be. So that's one area right there that I think is going to be a positive change. Also, the ability to find a job. When you are going to go for a job and they do a background check, things like this come up. And for you not to be able to get secure employment for you and your family because you were arrested for possession of marijuana and it's a felony, that's a shame, I think. Everyone deserves a second chance. Even people that have violent and serious crimes, unless it's something really heinous, like, murder or some crazy thing like that. But for most crimes out there, I think most people believe in second chances. And when it comes to cannabis and marijuana possession, give me a break. I mean, we're, I think, as a society, beyond treating it like a felony and barring people from getting jobs because they've been arrested for possessing it. So we're going to see that in Arizona now, a lot of applications starting for expungement of records.
That's really good to hear. And to your point, it's like you're almost exacerbating the issue, right? When you just continue to lock people up and stack them up in these jail cells and in these prisons where, these are minor offenses. And like you said, I mean, cannabis is no worse than alcohol. In fact, I would
Yeah.
argue it's better, so uh,
Right.
it's an outdated law that needs to be overturned, and we're starting to see momentum with Arizona and the other states overturning these laws, and that will ultimately force the hand of the federal government. That's just a matter
Yeah.
of um, so, Louis, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about the impact that the new Arizona legislation for adult use, the impact that it'll have on small businesses. We know that there's large MSOs, multi-state operators like Afria, TerraSand, that are going to be starting to really hone in on these states that have become legal. Florida.
Hmm.
You've got New Jersey. So is there a concern for small businesses who have been operating, and is it a threat at this point, or where do they fit into this?
Now, so first of all, let me say something about this, the previous topic we were just talking about, and this is something everybody should know about, then I'll address the small business question. I think it was yesterday, or maybe even Wednesday, what is it, Friday? Yeah, Wednesday, the Arizona Attorney General's office decided that they're going to dismiss proactively all pending cases that involve possession of marijuana. So
That's great.
this is the Arizona Attorney General's office that typically wouldn't do something like this. Now, these are people that were arrested recently and have pending charges. So this is not for people that have already been convicted. They're going to have to apply once the law is implemented and there's a process involved. My point is, though, that if you see action like that taken proactively, what that tells me is not necessarily that the Arizona Attorney General's office has this change of heart and they're politically becoming less conservative. Not at all. What I think it tells us is exactly to your next question, is that they see this as a burden on their resources. They have so many pending cases that involve marijuana possession that it takes so much resources. It's a very resource intense thing to do, to process, right? So once they get those off of their case file, they're going to be able to focus on more serious crimes that, frankly, in my opinion, should be focused on. So with that said,
Absolutely.
to your question about small business, I know there's a group out there, there's a movement, if you will, that says this is going to be a problem for small business for a variety of reasons. I've heard all the reasons. Frankly, I don't think it is going to be a problem at all. Now, I want to make sure I'm getting your question right. When you say small businesses, you're not talking about the dispensaries. You're talking about the effect on, your mom and pop small business. It could be a dry cleaning, it could be a restaurant, things like that, right?
Well, no, I'm asking small businesses within the cannabis industry. So they could be local mom and pop dispensaries,
Yeah.
family owned cultivators, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I was misunderstanding. I thought you meant, are people going to see people high in their stores, their restaurants, kind of a thing? No, you're talking about small businesses such as cannabis dispensaries. What's going to be a huge opportunity for them? Now, I will say that in many cases, cities, for example, once they start developing their licensing procedure, are going to give preference to existing dispensaries that have already had the medicinal sales. But it doesn't mean that small businesses that are out there do not have an opportunity to get in the door. And I've seen this in California, for example. We've helped a lot of clients that were interested in getting into the door when they have never been in the industry before. And it was determined on a lot of factors that involved the cities. Do they want to set aside a few licenses for people that have never been involved, for nonprofits, for minorities, for whatever it may be? So this is a huge opportunity for small businesses to get into the industry. And we've been getting a lot of calls ever since this passed on that specific topic.
Yeah, I would imagine also that the existing license holders for hemp cultivation would want to make the pivot as well.
Absolutely. I would encourage them to do that. This is a great opportunity for them to get involved. Now, one thing I will mention, because I'm sure it's going to happen in Arizona, if you contrast it again with California, one of the weak areas in California was that when cannabis became legal, there wasn't there was a standardized way, but they left a lot up to the cities and how to vet potential licensees, how to vet people that want to apply for a license, and I'm not just talking, criminal background check, all the standard stuff. That's the standardized things that are out there. But what I'm talking about is, do you require a business plan? If so, what kind? Do you require an in-person presentation to your city council? Do you require at what type of real estate transaction are required to even get a seat at the table? For example, in California, when this happened, if you didn't have a building secured or a real estate transaction in process, you weren't even allowed to submit an application in many cases, but in some cities you were. So a lot of these questions about who gets to the table is an open-ended one.
Is that a good? I mean, it's from my perspective, hearing that approach that California took when it came to the license application.
Yeah.
It sounds like they want people to apply that are really serious, right? That are either, like you said, in a transactional process for real estate, or they actually own a building.
So that was the intent, yes. But there were a lot of pitfalls, and I'm going to kind of take you down a little path, and we can get back to this question. But when I say it was a pitfall, or I don't want to call it a loophole, I know the intent was exactly what you said, to get qualified individuals, groups to come to the table, to make sure that you're not just bringing someone that's going to waste your time, right? But here's the problem. That opened the door to a lot of corruption. And right now, I'm not sure if you've heard, but there was a major FBI raid in the city of Compton, in the city of Baldwin Park, that involved the city of Baldwin Park's attorney, the city attorney, a councilman in Compton, and a planning commissioner in the city of San Bernardino. This was a couple weeks ago. And the allegation of course, is that there's some type of corruption involving licensing and real estate transactions and bribery of elected officials and all this and that. And one particular instance in which a company was granted by the city council roughly a 50-year monopoly for transportation and cultivation, rather. So there's a lot in that. Now, how did that even happen is the point. The point is that the city of Baldwin Park, in this case, said, we're only going to allow people that have real estate transactions, that have a business plan. They had a very, very secure process. But what happened was, okay, the allegation is that those folks that came to the table with all of those boxes checked off, essentially the allegation is they found ways to pay people off to make sure that they had the real estate transaction in place, that there were, this is not me talking, this is the allegation, that there were envelopes of cash given to the property owner to secure the real estate, that the business plan wasn't all legit, but bribes were made to secure votes. So whether or not that's true, the legal process will figure that part out. But my point is that even in the city's best attempt to make the process clean, you have the FBI in there, right? So
almost like if there's a will, there's a way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
More red tape that you put up and make it more difficult to enter the process,
Thank you.
Find a way, and that's where the added corruption comes, because all these other backhanded deals are happening, like the forgery of the real estate agreement or whatever it is, right?
Exactly. There's another case focusing in on this real estate requirement, because that's one of the requirements that I've always felt was a bit strange and open to corruption on cities' parts. Now, I understand the intent. The intent of the city is like, look, don't even knock on our door. We have so much demand. Unless you have a real estate transaction in the works or you have secured a building, we don't want to hear from you. I get that. That vets out a lot of people. But it does two things that I think are problematic. One is it vets out a lot of mom and pops that can't necessarily afford, to secure a building. I mean, real estate in cannabis is extremely high. And the second thing it does is it allows, and I've heard of this, where some interested investors will find an old dilapidated building or an old auto parts store or whatever that fits the criteria of what the city is looking for to be converted into a cannabis dispensary. And they'll drive up, knock on the door, ask for the owner, and say they want to secure the property for 6 months. Here's $50,000 security deposit. And you get the building, you know, the owner is, I mean, it's money, right? So they've secured the building illegally by dropping a bunch of cash to this property owner. I've heard of that happening in more than one occasion. So while the city's intent is to make it clean, what you're really doing in many cases, you're allowing the big operators, the big boys, the investors to come on in and lock everybody out by a backdoor deal. So yeah, wherever, you know, there's always going to be a way.
Yeah. Your point also about just excluding those mom and pops, right? I mean, that's what entrepreneurship is, right? I mean, it's
Right.
bootstrapping, it's like figuring out how you can make things work. And not everybody has capital up front, you know, to do
No,
that. So you are
not that much.
right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, so you're eliminating a lot of potential successful business owners in the future because again, everything is kind of steps. You don't, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a building process, you
yeah,
know.
exactly. You know, and these are cities that I don't think foresee this kind of stuff because they're not cannabis consultants. They're not on our, like what we do. They're not working with the legislature or the city councils. So they have the right intention, but they don't, as with many cases in all of government, they don't foresee the consequences of enacting a rule or a law. And in many cases, by enacting a rule or a law, you actually allow for more corruption. And you know,
Right.
we all know that story.
Or the lack of not implementing any regulations, like in the
Yeah.
FDA's case, where it's the wild west right now when it comes to hemp and CBD and
Yep.
what you're buying. You know.
Hey, when you say Wild West, man, I'll bold, italicize, and underline it. It is literally the Wild West. I mean, I've heard stories.
It's
Yeah,
insane.
I mean, we heard a story, not to get into detail, but um, a guy who has a grow and he essentially had to hire a bunch of dudes on horses with shotguns, man. I mean, what's more Wild West than that, right? So, I mean, and that's literally, I'm not even exaggerating. He had to do that. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah, man.
I've said it over and over, and people are getting tired of me probably repeating this. But I had a gentleman on. I'm blanking on his name, but they're like one of the national testing labs for these nationwide reports,
Yeah.
the efficacy of CBD products, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he said that their company, I think in 2019, audited every single CBD product on Amazon's platform, and 80% came back with zero CBD,
Yeah.
zero.
It doesn't surprise me. You know, it brings up a um, kind of a little FYI for people too. You know, be very careful, not only in situations like that, but you know, still, this hasn't become law yet in Arizona. So let's say you purchase something innocently, medicinally from a dispensary, and you're transporting it in your car on the 10 freeway into California because you want to, you know, share it with your family or your pet, and you're pulled over. It's not law yet, right? So you could still get um, arrested. The hell am I? Yeah, that's a whole Freudian slip there for bizarre reasons. I don't even want to know why, but
Podcast, Louie.
right. That's a different, no, but you could still get arrested and charged with a felony. So
Yeah.
just because it's not law yet and it's still treated as a felony in Arizona, and people don't realize, look, I purchased something with good intentions. I have a card, but if you're transporting it across the 10 freeway, that's a no-no.
Yeah, and especially that medical product, you're gonna definitely smell it. I mean, just without it being medical, it's very,
Right.
you know what I mean. But an officer will definitely smell that. So you're right.
Oh, I mean,
Careful.
yeah, I mean, you don't want to roll the dice on that. Yeah, it's just not, you know, the intent of people passing this law, I believe, for most people, you get a small fringe element, you know, that are just, you know, frankly, you know, defund the police and they just want to smoke weed. I get it, but that's every law you have. They're going to be a small fraction of people that just, you know, but I think for the most part, when people voted for this in Arizona, they understood that if we give the responsibility to government to enact sound laws around the use of it recreationally, there's going to be a boon, a positive effect in our state budgets and around the perception. So I really believe in my heart that that was the reason why people passed it. And so that's where we're at, right?
Well, and people are becoming more educated too. You know, it's
Yes.
not like the 60s and the 70s, or even
Oh man.
when they're talking about reefer madness and this and that. I think that enough time has passed where we can look back objectively and say, okay, cocaine versus cannabis, heroin versus cannabis. You know, I think that we've come to that point. The next step is really having people, and including myself, because I'm learning every day, understand the benefits of each cannabinoid, right? And really
Right.
these cannabinoids marry with our endocannabinoid system, which again, would be a whole other topic to talk about. But I wanted to talk about this. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Did you have something?
I was just quickly going to say, you're right. It's like that old, cocaine and reefer song back then, like the old one, Muddy Waters does it, man. At the end, he's like, I ain't messing around with no cocaine, right? I mean, it's funny, but it isn't. I mean, this is not a way to get people introduced to hardcore drugs. Absolutely not. I don't think the people that are in the industry that use it recreationally for the right reasons and medicinally have it in their mind that they want to open up the gates to cocaine or whatever it may be. That's utterly ridiculous to me. So there is a difference in people's minds that want this to pass between something like cocaine and something like cannabis that's natural, right? So
Right.
yeah,
I would even argue that, like, you know, it's just as easy to get heroin or cocaine as it is marijuana. So to your point of
right.
people using it responsibly, whether it's medicinal or recreational, they have the option. They're not choosing it. You know,
No,
so
right. And frankly, if anyone out there is using cocaine or anything harder than that, you need help
right.
because that is just not good for you. And marijuana is not the same. It does not have the science behind it, the industry behind it, the research behind it, the widespread usage, even in people that suffer from things like PTSD, than something like cocaine or whatever else you may have that's artificial. So, um, yeah, and I speak seriously on this. If people are out there addicted to cocaine or methamphetamines or whatever it may be, you really should seek help. And I mean that, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that for marijuana.
Louis, I want to get your thoughts on this. This might be a little off topic. We'll get back to
That's okay.
this, but I do want to ask you. So Oregon, right? Oregon.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, they went all in. They decriminalized cocaine, heroin. I mean, methamphetamine. You name it, right?
Right. Right.
Um, I don't know if that's such a good. I don't know, right? I mean, look, I understand the libertarian viewpoint of
Yeah.
the individual's decision. If they want to put that toxic stuff in their body and they want to be addicted, okay, you know, it's up.
Right.
But we talk about the unintended consequences of things like this, right? And so the other side of me just thinks, okay, but what about like more of an influx of these drugs being on the street now that they're decriminalized, right? And the maybe the chance of someone who wasn't addicted before doing it. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts on their move there?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I'm glad you raised it because having been in politics for so long and having been mayor for 10 years as I was, I learned something, and that is that it's that old Goldilocks story, the porridge being too hot, too cold, and then there's one right in the middle that's just right. And I believe that can be applied, even though it's a story. I think it could be applied to life in many ways because it's so simple. That is that you can't go too far to the left, you can't go too far to the right. There's always laws that you just have to find the sweet spot to implement, right? Or establish laws around things in that middle zone. I understand the libertarian perspective. I don't necessarily agree with it. I also understand someone that's on the opposite side's perspective. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think the answer always lies in the middle. You have to take bits and pieces of what the intent is on the far left, for example, and you have to take bits and pieces of what the intent is on the far right, bring them together and figure it out. Life is about moderation. Life is about finding the sweet spot. Life is about compromise to a certain extent. And you just have to understand that. And I think that's where we're at with cannabis. I think we're finally getting there, right? I mean, look where we're at. We're passing laws. This is not a complete leftist or a complete conservative
Mm-hmm.
agenda. This is something that both agree on, whether it's criminal justice side or Now, to your question about what they did in Oregon, I personally think that was a mistake. I obviously, they know what's best in their state, and the voters spoke, and the legislature can do what they want with their state. That's fine. To me, I don't disagree with that. But if I were there, I don't think I would be able to support that. And I think what you're going to see, unfortunately, is you are going to see a lot of these unintended consequences of, arrests, and not only the arrests, but you're going to start seeing the effects in the homeless community. You're going to start seeing the effects in people's lives, unfortunately, being changed, destroyed in a lot of cases. Now, look, could I be wrong? Of course. I don't claim to know everything, but I just don't think that I'm going to be wrong. I mean, I could be, but I don't think so. I don't think decriminalizing drugs in that example that are so hardcore, so to speak, is the right move. I really don't.
Chemically induced. I mean, let's be clear that we're talking about cannabis is a plant, right?
Right.
Opposed to cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, which are chemically induced drugs that are man-made, right?
Yeah.
And there's a big difference there, right? There's a
huge difference.
Huge difference. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, you bring up a good point. I mean, you get someone in a lab synthetically producing a drug, and you have something that was grown properly out on a grow. Seriously, which one would you choose?
Right. And I want to make that distinction because obviously THC is classified in the Schedule 1 narcotics due to the Controlled Substances Act, and
right.
that category. But that's why we're having these podcasts. That's why we're having these discussions. And that's why Arizona and other states are passing these bills for cannabis. And I want to be clear that they're not in the same bucket, so I don't want people to think that at all, because they are completely separate,
That's a very good distinction. And, being in the industry, we forget that a lot of people that may be listening or are new to the whole industry don't quite realize that. They're treated differently according to the law and the government. So they're treated similarly, unfortunately, in some cases, but we're beginning to see the change of that. So you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so to get back to Arizona specifically, the great news is happening there. Let's talk turkey now, okay?
Yeah, let's talk turkey.
Let's talk the tax revenue. That's what everybody's excited about, that as they've seen these adult states come into action, and they're seeing the revenue that's being generated. So let's talk specifically about where the tax revenue goes once the law is passed and businesses are operating in the cannabis space in Arizona.
Yeah. So I have some of the whole law in front of me. And by the way, on our website or by giving us a call, we have a copy of the exact text, that was passed, how many signatures it gathered. But my point by saying that is that I really encourage everybody to actually read you can get your information from an article or this or that, but I really encourage the actual law
send me the link.
I will.
I'll add it and I'll tweet it out for you. Yeah.
And I wish I had the exact numbers of the percentages of where the money goes. I know it's in here somewhere, so as I'm talking, but let me first of all say this. A lot of the money is going to go towards the enforcement of the rules and regs. So for example, like you have cities that are going to be responsible for establishing their own rules, their own regulations, allowing for inspections, things like that. That's going to be a bucket of money that's going to be dedicated towards that. That's one of the areas. Some of it's going to go towards education, for example. A small percent is going to go towards the Attorney General's office for enforcement. So it's going to get divvied up around, the intent is it's going to get divvied up around the implementation of it, so that when it's official law, that it's not going to be problematic. So, that's the intent. They're going to take the pie, split it up accordingly, and hopefully allow for fewer problems than otherwise would be, right?
That's great. Yeah. So like you said, college districts, police, fire departments, state highways, justice, all that kind of stuff. That's great. I mean, why? Hey, that's all the stuff that people need, right? I mean, in a civil society, that's awesome.
It is, and here's actually some. And I apologize for not having the numbers ready, but for example, you know, 15 million to the Arizona Teachers Academy Fund, right? 10 million to the department to fund the formation and operation of councils, commissions, and programs dedicated to improving public health. So those are just two examples. Here's another one. 10 million to the governor's office of highway safety to distribute grants for reducing impaired driving and educational, reducing DUIs, for example. 2 million to the department to implement, carry out, and enforce the rules. So in the law, it actually gives dollar amounts. 4 million to the department to distribute grants to qualified nonprofit entities that will provide outreach to individuals who will be eligible to file petitions for expungement. So there's going to be money set aside for that. We're already getting calls on that, by the way.
Yeah, great.
2 million to the department to develop and implement. Bottom line is there's money being divvied up for a whole host of things, but that expungement part is actually a very critical element of the law. I believe that's going to be huge. So
I agree. Yeah, let's talk a little about that. So when it comes to the expungement, I think that I read that there's a specific amount that the people who were convicted for the cannabis possession, it's like what, 2 to 3 ounces or less. So
correct.
My question is, what about the people that had more than 2 or 3 ounces? Are they still stuck with facing a felony or?
Okay. So first of all, you're right. That the numbers you mentioned are accurate. Now, there's two kind of parts to my answer here. One is that you got to understand that the way the law is written is that this applies to people that were convicted of possession. Now, if you're involved in trafficking or anything related to anything other than possession, you may be out of luck, because trafficking, like I said in the beginning, is a very, very different type of crime. I mean, that involves, a cross-border movement or across the states, things like that. And trafficking is obviously not the same as someone that was arrested on the corner for having a joint, right? Mm-hmm. So that's number one. If it involves possession, it's one thing, but trafficking or anything else is different. And the other issue is that there's going to be a process set up. And in terms of the ounces that you mentioned, it's right. So if you fall into that sweet spot, so to speak, there's a process that I believe the department has until April or May to set up rules around the expungement, the Attorney General's office, around the expungement process. And our firm right now is literally reading up on that, because all we have right now is the law. But the administrative part of how the department is going to go about processing applications has not determined. So if we get a call as a law firm saying, hey, I was arrested back a couple of years ago, I want to get this off my record, our answer is, let's take your information down, let's set up a consultation, and let's put you in line on the top of the line so that when we're able to process an application, we can get you done right away. So that's where we're at with this whole expungement thing. We're going to see a huge influx. Right. There's too many people in Arizona that were arrested for possession that we can help, and we're going to be more than happy to do that.
That's such great news. Yeah. And just to push a bit further on the out of that sweet spot, right? So I know that you mentioned trafficking is totally different than possession. Yeah. I understand that. So in the eyes of the law, when it comes to Arizona, does that mean that they're assuming that you're trafficking if you have over that amount, even if you're not?
Oh, no, good question. No. So trafficking is very specific. You have to be arrested and charged with, arrested and convicted of trafficking. And that would mean that you were involved in the illegal part of it. There's a lot more detail to it, but part of it could mean that you were involved in the illegal transportation of it from point A to point B. And it gets more complicated if it involves crossing the border or, I mean, what were you transporting? Did it involve other drugs? All this kind of stuff. So
they have to they really have to prove that you're in trafficking, you're conducting trafficking behavior to really.
Correct. And put it this way, think of, the show Narcos or something like that. That's kind of what trafficking would involve typically. Yeah. It rarely involves someone that's just hanging out at the, the QT with a joint.
Right. Yeah. And I know it's a funny question when I keep asking, because like over 3 ounces is a lot of cannabis for just one to have. But
right.
You never know. I don't know. There's some people that.
Well,
have a lot. So
put it this way, you would be surprised. I mean, we hear it all here, and yeah, I mean, you get people that are charged with trafficking, and they're like, look, I'm traffic, I'm not a drug trafficker, but you were doing something that they can check the box off as, yeah, you were trafficking, and you're like, no, I wasn't, so
right.
just got to be careful is the point.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Louie, let's talk about the future state of Arizona. And you've done a great job of talking us through like the process, right? What needs to happen before the state can get up and running and operating with these cannabis companies. So once that takes place, what do you foresee? Like if you had a magic crystal ball, what's the future hold?
Yeah, so good question. I think that us as a firm and other firms that are involved in this. So, well, let me start by saying this. Two things. One is I think similar to what you've seen in California will happen here in terms of the demand for how to expunge records, for how to get into the industry. You'll see a similar influx of interest, right? That's number one. Number two, we tried to, as a firm, get ahead of the curve literally even years ago, knowing that at some point this would pass. We started doing our homework, crossing our T's, dotting our I's, setting.
You were having meetings outside of your conference because those guys were scared to talk in the actual conference room. I remember you telling me you were like, no, let's talk in public. Come on.
Right. I shared with you the stories of many times where, I'd, be in a city hall or here somewhere and bringing up cannabis and it's like, oh my God, don't say that. It's a very, I'm from California. It's a strange, I've never experienced that till I came here, but now it's a different environment, obviously, but you're right. Those were the odd times, and so we're going to start seeing conversations held. We're going to start seeing an influx of people being interested in those two areas, how to get in the industry, how to expunge records. But long term, I really, really see law firms like us that have got ahead of the curve and set the foundations to help people in those situations really start new wings of their firm. It's going to become a whole new industry for people like us that do government relations, that do cannabis consulting, that do criminal law expungement of records. That's going to be a whole new thing. Now, in California, that's the norm. So I see what happened here in terms of the industry from our side.
Okay, got you. Yeah, California is a good comparison, and it's a good. I mean, obviously, every state's going to do their own thing and take their own approach, but it's always good to see what others are doing so you can mimic some best practices, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. And one of speaking of best practices, one of them is not being afraid to have the conversation anymore. I mean, come in the conference room, come to our firm, let's talk about this, and not be think we're going to get raided by whomever. But I mean, it's weird to me to this day, and I shared this with you last time. It's so weird to me how there are still a lot of people out there that the social stigma of just saying the word. I mean, it's bizarre, but hey, look, I mean, it is what it is. And when you come from a different state like California and you come here into the environment, you have to really understand, wow, this is a different place, just as California and every state is. But so I think long-term, bottom line, what I'm saying is I think long-term, the environment around the discussion and the product itself is going to be completely changed.
Yep.
A whole 180.
I agree. Yeah. And every day public support is growing. I think I read an article that said that a Gallup poll showed that 7 in every 10 Americans are for legalization of cannabis. So
the last poll I saw was 72%. And that, you're right. And it grows every day. And we see where the trends are. I think the question now, though, because you're right, it's clear what people want to happen. I think the people have spoken, and I think now the responsibility falls on government to figure out the rules behind how to do this right. That's the challenge right there, and that's where we're going to see a lot of trips and falls and things like that. And it's a learning process, but that's what we're here for. We try to help as many people as we can get through hold their hand and do it the right way.
That's right. I was just going to say, we're fortunate to have you, Louie, and CIMA Law Group and other stepping up to the plate and helping these local to even state to federal, hopefully the federal government at some point, navigate these regulations, because it's going to take a collaborative effort. You know what I mean?
It is.
We're all barely learning more and more about this plan every day, and it'll happen. It's just going to take time,
It is, are we good on time, by the way? I wanted to mention something.
We're good. Go ahead.
Okay. One area that I wanted to touch on is one of the areas that, and I guess normally I wouldn't say it because it's kind of like an inside firm thing of what we're doing, but I'll share it. It's okay. We're ahead of the curve on this. One of the areas that we really feel there's a big need for with cannabis is educating elected officials on how to deal with the industry, how to avoid bribery attempts, how to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest, how to navigate the industry without getting the feds raiding your office. Because I really encourage people, just look online right now, type in FBI raids, cannabis, California, Arizona, wherever you want, and you will be surprised how many raids and investigations are going on, not only on the federal level, but on the state and local level. Because here's what happens. And this is why I think as a firm, we're really, really poised to go out there and speak to mayors and council members and elected officials on how to navigate the industry. Because here's what happens. Look, you're a mayor, right, of a local city, a city you think is off the radar because it's small, maybe 50, 60,000 residents, and you just opened the licensing to potential cannabis dispensaries, and you have cannabis owners knocking at your door saying, hey, look, I just want to have dinner with you, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor. We want to talk about it with good intentions. We've been around for 10 years. We're doing this, we're doing that. Here's our business plan. And we just want to have dinner with you. No harm, no foul, right? Well, guess what? You get someone in the community that saw you at the restaurant, hanging out with the cannabis dispensary, all of a sudden they get suspicious. They may not even like you politically, right? They march down to the DA's office, the Attorney General's office, and they file a complaint. There might be nothing at all, and you might get cleared at the end of the day. But trust me on this, if they even have a hint of something that may be illegal, they're going to launch an investigation. And once that gets out there, they have every right to seek a search warrant, to public records, to start investigating and interviewing people. And now you're dealing with a political crisis. When you had no intent of breaking the law, you may not even have taken a bribe, but it appeared that you may have. And that's the problem. And so what we're trying to do is really, really educate elected officials, because I've been there, as an elected official, and I understand when you get the DA's office knocking at your door, requesting records, wanting to see cell phone bills and all this kind of, it's unnerving, right? You may not have done anything wrong, but it's not a pleasant situation to be in. And when you throw cannabis in the mix, trust me, it's not a nice, pleasant thing at all. So we're trying to get out there and trying to educate elected officials on how to navigate the system.
That's such an interesting perspective. I mean, something or point that I never thought of. So what you're saying is, and this goes back to the beginning of our conversation, where there's that trickle down effect, right? We're waiting on Arizona's Department of Agriculture, Arizona's Department of Health and Safety to issue guidelines for how to regulate the new bill, right, of adult. And with that trickle effect is where the local governments step in and they adhere and work within those parameters of those guidelines, right? And so you're saying at that point, it's important to educate those local governmental officials like the mayor, like the city council members, because due to the zoning laws and how things shake out, they don't want to have that perception of taking a bribe or whatnot if seen in public.
Well, yes, that's the obvious part, correct. But then there's also other things that are involved, like conflict of interest. You mentioned bribery, which is kind of the easy one to think of, but there's conflict of interest. There's all these ethics violations. There's a fair political practices, political contribution violations. I'll give you an example. So without mentioning cities and names, you have a city A, that is allowing a dispensary to go in. And in City A, you have 5 council members, one of which is a cannabis consultant on the side. And they're working on a deal in City B that has nothing to do with City A. They're disconnected. But the cannabis dispensary that wants to go into City A also wants to go into City B with the help of this consultant. Now it gets weird because this person is getting financially compensated for the work they're doing over here. But now you raise the question of, well, they voted on this license, helped them over here. Where else are they involved in? Now you've got the feds knocking at your door. And that could involve bribery. It can involve conflict of interest. It can involve being forced to resign. It could be just the mere perception of an investigation going on. So it gets really tricky. And then not to mention, you start bringing in elements that involve people in the cannabis industry too. You don't want to be connected with a bribery investigation in City A, B, C, D, or F, because now guess what? When you try to go and get a license in another state, that comes up.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that pops up, right? So we are doing our best to try to get in front of it and try to educate these elected officials, because you're right. Zoning is one area, but like I said, there's a whole host of you get a look at. Right now, I can just tell you this. In California, there's a lot of investigations going on. And one of the main reasons is because a lot of these council members are in office, currently elected. They just got reelected, mayors, council people, but they also serve as cannabis consultants to dispensary owners, getting people in to have meetings with different cities based on the relationships they have. Now, there's nothing on the surface wrong with that. However, you could bring up what's called it's called a 1099 violation under the California Government Code, Section 1099. It's a conflict of interest code. Huh. You could, and that's a felony, by the way, to violate the conflict of interest code. There's certain criteria that must be met, but just the mere perception of you violating that code, you could be forced to resign. My advice when I deal with these elected officials, I say, look, you have to choose one or the other. If you want to be a cannabis consultant, you should not necessarily also continue to serve as mayor or council member or whatever. You need to resign, then do your thing.
Right.
Because it's going to get too tricky.
I could see like when you say conflict of interest, because basically they're just getting the bid and they're winning the contract in every municipality because they know how the workings of the intergovernmental processes work, and then they can apply those learnings to other districts and counties, right?
Yeah, it's technically an unfair advantage, and it could. What the real question becomes is there a personal financial benefit to a vote that you made that would benefit someone else? For example, if you voted yes for a license and you also benefited personally, financially from that, that's a conflict of interest. You have to you can't involve yourself in that vote. You have to abstain. But what happens when the vote you give, you're not benefiting personally 6 months down because you helped the guy in that city? So now there's a gray area there, right? So it's better just to avoid that problem, in my opinion, rather than have the feds at your door. I mean, hey, maybe some people are saying, fuck it, I'll take the risk.
No, I like to sleep well at night and not
right.
So yeah, the option of just avoiding the conflict and overall is the safe way to go. Yeah,
it's the safe way to go, and that's why we're right now launching a whole different arm to what we do in educating elected officials through webinars and seminars how to navigate the cannabis industry. You don't want to end up on the wrong side of a federal investigation or even a state investigation. So.
Right. Wow. Well, you guys are doing great work, Louie. Where can people find, the exact bill that you mentioned, where it has all the numbers when it comes to the tax revenue that's coming in and the detailed stuff, along with any other helpful information that they'd want to seek out?
Yeah. So the easiest thing to do would be to simply email me. It's Louie@CIMA It's also on our website, CIMA, CIMA lawgroup.com. Find me there, send me an email. That's the easy way to do it. I can just forward, the info. You can search online. The problem is that online there's a lot of different sites posted the wrong version, this and that. We have the actual version here. So Louie@CIMAlawgroup.com.
Okay.
I can forward it to them.
And then, and also another option, if you don't want your inbox blown up, I'll get the link from you. after this, and I'll put it in the description box for the
Yeah, that would be great.
and we'll also tweet it out also. So
Yeah, that'd be awesome. No, you can do that. And you know, the whole goal, everything we talked about comes down to education. I mean, it could all be summarized, right? So whether it's an elected official, a voter, someone on a city staff, someone in the industry, it's all about educating and changing perception. And that's what we're doing.
mm-hmm. We'll continue to blaze the trails, Louie. We really appreciate.
Yeah, so to speak, right?
Yes, blaze.
Yeah.
Did it at the end. You noticed that?
Yeah.
That
We're
pun.
hashing it all out, man.
And Louie, I really enjoyed talking with you, man. And I want to have you on again as
Absolutely.
you really understand the landscape. Or, I mean, you already have a good handle on zoning, but as you know, new things evolve and whatnot. Let's talk about it, because I know that this information would be beneficial, especially to states that are, you know, on the brink of becoming adult use. So
Yeah, I would be back, and I'd even like to talk more about this whole investigation stuff with elected officials at some point. There's a lot more to that than people think, and they need to be educated, because they may, you know, unknowingly be involved in something that they don't want to be. So
absolutely, yeah, let's do that. Well, hey, thanks again for your time, Louie, and congrats again, and congrats again to the people of Arizona, man. It's a new time.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Appreciate your time, and we're all excited here. So anytime.
Awesome. And thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.
Take care. We'll see you.